Hello everyone, welcome back to Bare Thread. So this is another book review for my most recent read that I did actually even put little tabbies in to help me with the review. And this is a positive one. I did really like this. So this is Eating to Extinction, The World's Rarest Foods and Why We Need to Save Them by Dan Saladino, published in 2023, so it's quite a recent book. My sister bought me this for my birthday. I had never heard of the author, I didn't really know anything about the book when she gave it to me, so it probably wouldn't have been one that I would have picked necessarily, although I am interested in food generally. But I have been wanting to read more non-fiction. It has been a little bit hit and miss, in fact probably more miss than hit in the last few months. So I wanted to give this a go because I was intrigued. And I was hoping to get a good non-fiction book under my belt. So the book is about the foods that we are very close to losing completely, going completely extinct. So this includes plants, grains, alcohols, stimulants like tea and coffee, desserts, and also meat and seafood, including oysters or flat oysters. But apparently, according to the book, in Victorian England or in Victorian London, oysters were so common and abundant. There were 3,500 oyster cellars in London alone, and in the year of 1850, 500 million oysters were sold in just Billingsworth Market? Billingsgate Market. I have got some notes because that's the kind of thing that I would never remember. But just 20 years later, that number had dropped to 700,000 because of the overconsumption of the oysters. As a result of losing or nearly losing a lot of these foods and plants and animals, we've also lost a lot of the diversity in our diet. So Saladino says that over the course of human history we have consumed over 6,000 different plants, and now we mainly eat just 9 different plants, and of which 3 of those, rice, corn and wheat, make up 50% of the calories that we consume. And then also with things like animals, so 95% of the American dairy herds and about 70% of the European dairy herds are all just one type of cow, the Holstein cow, which is the classic kind of black and white one that we kind of used to seeing. And because of now artificial insemination, one bull can actually produce millions of offspring around the world because they can send the semen around the world. So it has massively shrunk down the gene pool that these animals are coming from as well. A bit of a recurring theme throughout the book is that a lot of these plants and animals, but they have evolved to suit a very specific environment, usually quite a harsh environment, but that they also require a lot more work and effort to grow and harvest and to get the yield from. So such as Cavalja wheat, I think is how you pronounce it, which requires has to be milled twice, once to break down the husk and then one to actually break down the seed, I think, to get the goodness out. But you have to do it all twice, which is just obviously more work. So some of the problem has actually been caused by good intentions, so people, scientists trying to help particularly food production and the amount of food that we can produce. So in particular in post-World War II Europe, when millions faced starvation, there was the Green Revolution, when scientists were working to increase the yield of the plants and the grains. So in particular they developed a new type of wheat that would be a lot easier to grow and would have a much bigger yield, and so grain production actually tripled in that time, and there were a lot more people that could be fed, and that did that period did prevent those people from starving. One of the downsides of that was that these new grains required a lot more artificial or man-made fertilizers, which uses a lot more fossil fuel, which is not particularly good for the environment. And the other thing is that it creates monocultures, where you just have one type of the plant or the grain on its own, and taking over without that variety and diversity, and it does make them potentially susceptible to diseases. Sometimes the problem is an unintended consequence of an action. So, for example, the Mexican Olaton maize, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, and the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. So it was the intention of that was to open up trade and the flow of goods between Canada, America or the USA, and Mexico. So the belief was that about 500,000 farmers would leave the rural areas, the farms in Mexico, and perhaps move to the cities or the industrial areas, and it would kind of industrialize Mexico. But what actually happened was that 10 million farmers left those rural areas and the farms. Mexico was opened up to the import of American maize corn, and the Mexican farmers couldn't compete. And the knock-on effect of that was that actually Mexican diets actually got a lot worse, and the Mexican health got a lot worse as well. But Saladino does make the point that the impact is not just nutritionally, that we've lost this diversity has affected the nutrition of our diets, but also that it's cultural. So he makes the connection between the foods that we grow and the place where we're living, and so there's that connection between the food and the place, but then also what meals were being prepared in the home, and so also the relationship then between farmers and people growing the crops and the plants, and then the cooks in the kitchen and the recipes being produced, and then all of that being connected to the place that the people were living in. So Neolithic farmers, so a long time ago, when they were first domesticating grains and cereals, paired them with legumes, or what I would call pulses. So beans and lentils and stuff like that. One of the benefits of this is that the legumes help to fix the nitrogen from the air into the soil, and that really helps all of the plants to grow. And so the legumes and also the cereals that were grown alongside in the same field as the legumes. So it helped to make all of the plants be more productive. But so in China, millet was grown with soybeans, and in India, millet was grown with mung beans. And there's lots of other pairings like that Saladino mentions in the book. But also, it didn't just make the crops more productive, it also did help to make our diets more nutritious, because we also began pairing our meals with a mixture of the grains and the legumes. So he mentions a miso soup, which is barley and soybeans, a Tuscan stew, which is cannellini beans and millet again, I think. And then also mentions the British classic of beans on toast, which is a legume paired with a grain in the form of the wheat in the bread. We are losing or have lost our relationship with the natural world, like the Hadza tribe in Tanzania, who partner with a honey guide indicator bird that helps them to locate beehives in the baobab trees, and the bird can find the bees' nests, which is a lot harder for human beings to find, or the Hadza to find, but the bird can't get past the bees and the stinging of the bees. So the bird helps the people, the tribe, find the bees' nest, and then when they crack it open, I guess, to get the honey from it, which is a core part of their diet, the bird then benefits by being given some of the honey that they can also eat. I guess they get to the bees as well. But the Hasda tribe is under threat, or their way of life is under threat, as the amount of land that they have to live on is getting smaller and smaller as they're pushed off the lands that they've always lived on, as it's been taken over by things like development and dairy farming and space for livestock to graze. And then a big part of the problem is human greed, overconsumption, and even conflict, and that is a big part of the problem and a cause of the problems in the book. Like the bison in America, which were killed in a massive slaughter of animals, a systematic slaughter of animals that was at least partially because the bison was so central to the life and lifestyles of the indigenous population, the Native Americans, and so by killing the bison it really made it a lot harder for the Native Americans to continue living the way that they had been living. Also just the greed of wanting to sell the bison meat and their skin, so they were just hunted for that as well. And then also it was quite convenient that once the bison were cleared away, there was now lots of space for cattle to graze and kind of take over the space where the bison had been. I remember like doing this at school actually, about how the bison were hunted systematically, and it's sort of staggering to believe that it actually happened in the way that it did. I found the title of the book, Eating to Extinction, a little bit confusing because there are some foods like the Atlantic wild salmon which was just overfished and overconsumed, and that's the reason why it's close to extinction, certainly in the wild, although it is thriving sort of in captivity. Farmed salmon still exists. But then there is other foods that we just don't eat anymore because something else came along that was more commercial, produced a higher yield, so it sold better, made more money, and so we actually stopped eating the other foods, and so it's almost like we're not eating them into extinction. But I guess the point is that it's our entire way of eating that is the problem, and that is leading to the extinction of, or the potential extinction of, a lot of these plants, grains, legumes, the tea, the coffee, the alcohol, some of the animals and the seafood, and then some of the desserts. And so it's just thinking about how we eat and our current food system, and the changes that have happened in the last 150 years, which have led to less and less diversity and variety in our diets, the impact that's had on us nutritionally and culturally, and also on our environment and our relationship with that environment. It's potentially a little bit depressing because it is us feel like, well, what on earth can you do about it as an individual? But he does talk about there are seed banks where people are storing and saving the seeds of grains, that there are people trying to revive some of the lost foods or the old ways of making certain things, and that there are also people working to make safe areas of the sea, like sort of safe havens where the animals are not being fished, and allowing them to come back and thrive, and that apparently does seem to be working, at least in those areas. So there are some like positives, green shoots, but I suppose I'm still left a bit like, I'm not entirely sure what I can do about this, but it does make me want to look into what I am eating and see if there are ways that I can increase the variety of what I'm eating, and certainly not just to rely so heavily on wheat, which is a huge part of the Western diet. So it has got me thinking about that. Unfortunately, that may not be possible. I may not be able to make that many changes. But no, I recommend this book. It was very interesting. The sections are pretty short, but there are quite a lot of them. But they were all interesting, and he is a very engaging writer. His approach to appreciate the cultural aspect, the human aspect, it makes it an engaging read rather than just reading about dry facts about wheat. So I recommend. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you've read the book and what you think of the book, or any others that you think that I should pick up next. Give me a like and a subscribe to see more of these videos.